The Supreme Court's always been a political institution, but it's really the last 60 years, the post-World War II era, that the court's become so ideologically charged. And what happened, really beginning with the Warring Court, is that the court began to get very closely and intimately involved in civil rights and liberties disputes that have a really profound impact on American society. Now, what's different today is that this is the first time in about the last 60 years that we can sort the justices by their partisanship. So in the past, for example, there were liberal-leaning justices who were appointed by Republican presidents, justices like Earl Warren and Justice Souter. Today, that's not the case. Justices appointed by Republicans vote conservatively. Justices appointed by Democrats vote liberally. And this is really one of the first times that we've observed this phenomenon. Supreme Court appointments were largely absent from the 2012 election, but this is certainly going to change. I think what you're going to see is a lot of pressure, particularly by Democratic interest groups, to make judicial appointments, and particularly Supreme Court appointments, a really important factor. The suspicion is that Ginsburg is getting near retirement age, and so it's going to be very important, according to these interest groups, to elect a Democratic president and replace her with a liberal-leaning justice. Now, the issue of how appointments will shake out in the Senate, it really depends on who's elected. If a Republican candidate is elected, they'll have a relatively smooth path for their nominees. If a Democrat's elected, it's going to be quite different. And you can bet that the Republican Party will make big efforts to prevent a Democratic president from appointing a very liberal judge. So they'll probably have to satisfy us with a moderate liberal justice. I think there's two issues. They've decided a case on each issue that opened up the floodgates and provided very little guidance for future litigation. The first issue is the right to keep and bear arms. And so 8 years ago, the Supreme Court said there's an individual right to own a gun, but they didn't establish any real guidelines with respect to restrictions on that right. So we're going to see case after case in the coming decades whittling down exactly where that line is, where states can regulate the right to keep and bear arms. The other issue is the tension between equal protection of the laws and religious freedom. So as we see more and more states passing these so-called religious freedom laws, we see more and more business owners willing to refuse service to gay and lesbian couples, for example. The court's going to have to revisit this issue. Now, to a lot of people, these issues were solved in the 1950s, but that was with black civil rights. Today, we have a very, very different civil rights discourse in this country, and that involves the rights of gay Americans.